Welcome to webinar 5. I make it that we've got 4 minutes to go till 3 o'clock. We'll start on time. Nice to see so many of you attending this session. Questions you like on the questions box, and I shall deal with them as best I can as we go through this session, and we will have questions and answers at the end for as long as you want to stay on. So I make that another 2 minutes to go before we start. I see lots of familiar names turning up. You're all very welcome back. Session. I'm Jeremy Round. I've got a question in what are the 7 dwarfs called? I can tell you that. Thank you, Marjorie. I'll name and shame you, but I think it's a bit off subject. But welcome everybody. I'm glad you wanted to hear about this. It is a bit of a specialist subject. Not all people do this, but I know certainly many of the large banks are doing it, and I'm glad to see you want to know more about it. I hope I can give you something that fills some gaps in your knowledge. Okay, there's an advert that all of you will have regularly seen as we've been through these webinars. This is the penultimate webinar. It should finish on time because it probably is the shortest. And what is it all about? CTRP, as you may well know, cities, towns, regions and ports, is all about geographical screening. It's all about finding the gaps in your locations where you have an address but don't necessarily have a country. And why would this situation occur? Well, I mean, it happens a lot in trade finance operations, which I know not all of you are involved in, but when you're dealing with trade manifests, you often just get the head parts of the address, which don't necessarily include the country, and certainly may refer to ports of loading and embarkation. It may well apply to payments, where we've got some free text that we need to screen, which may include some locations we really want to know about. And of course it may also concern customers who we haven't recorded the country when we've recorded down the address, or we suspect we've recorded it incorrectly, and there may be a clue in the address that there's a country there that we might especially be interested in. So I put these in decreasing order of importance. In trade finance, CTRP screening is pretty much vital, and I would expect everybody to be doing it in that situation. Payments, it's pretty important. It's going to depend upon your risk appetite. And customer screening, well, some people do it, some people don't. It's going to depend on your data quality. And I think this next slide reflects that. Nothing in screening is mandated by the regulators. The regulators don't say you have to do customer screening or payment screening. They're not that specific, and they certainly don't say you need to do CTRP screening. So this is something for you to address a risk you've identified. If you don't believe you are at this risk currently, you certainly don't need to do CTRP screening, because it can be expensive to implement. It is going to produce a fair number of false positives, so it's going to be expensive to operate as well. But make sure you're confident that you need or don't need this. Now, if your risk calls for it and you call out that risk, then make sure you do it properly and well. That's all I'll say. So identify your risk and address the risk if you find it. So it's all about identifying a little gap where we haven't necessarily got the country on its own, we've just got some address elements. And what countries should we be particularly looking for in these addresses? Well, I've listed what I call the big 5 countries at the moment. In different jurisdictions, you may have the 6th country, particularly may still have Myanmar if you're in the United States. And you notice the flags there do not align with the country names, and this is quite deliberate. This is a little game for you to play afterwards, where you can join the flag to the country name with a biro. I'll leave that as a little exercise for you for fun. But certainly, depending on the nature of the business you're in and the jurisdiction you're in, there may be a lot more countries you might want to identify. We're addressing banks in this forum. If you were dealing in arms, there's more than half the countries in the world have trade restrictions on firearms. But banks, these 5, Myanmar for a lot of countries, especially in Europe, has now disappeared. Nauru was a 7th country that was on many people's list until about 2007. And as time changes, new countries will be added to this, I'm sure, particularly in those sort of Middle Eastern hotspots where we've got the Arab Spring still ongoing. So be prepared that this will be an ever-changing list. Now there is a 6th country I could add on there for many of you, a rather large country called the United States of America, which is not going to come into it for sort of sanctions-related stuff, but when we're all moving over to our FATCA programs, that could especially be a key input into this, where we're wishing to identify Americans through their addresses. So is there an official CTRP list? No, not at all. There is a United Nations group on this that was founded in the 50s, and their sort of rationale is to make an official CTRP list for the world, and virtually every country in the UN has signed up to this UN protocol, and some are delivering it. I think about 20 countries have so far delivered full gazetteers of their country according to the United Nations principles, where they list every place name, every populated place name, and every geographical feature in their country, and produce that list in 5 different languages, which off the top of my head are English, French, Spanish, Chinese, and one other. But our big 5 that we talked about earlier have not done anything particular on that, although Iran has produced a official gazetteer of one region, which they have published, but it's only a part of the country, so it doesn't really fulfill our requirement. So no, unfortunately there is no CTRP list that is official. So where can we get CTRP lists? Well, if you've got a nice screening product like your Furka Soft or your LexisNexis or Acuity or whatever, then they may well have provided a CTRP list inbuilt for you to use already. If you haven't, you're going to have to source one, and some companies will provide you with CTRP lists. We'll sell you one, but many others will too. There are public resources where you can actually download CTRP information, and the principal one of these is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which is a military or semi-military agency of the United States, and they have a rather large team of several thousand people who go around trying to find the places of all places in the world, and they've so far identified about 9 million names for geographic places in the world. They cover every country apart from America itself, which is covered by a similar agency called the Board of Geographic Names. Now that's very good, and it gives you millions of populated places, so you should be able to identify everywhere in the world. UNESI, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and don't be put off by the For Europe, because this is a global organisation, produce a very handy gazetteer of freight terminals, which can supplement that. It gives you the P in CTRP for ports, and that will give you road, rail, air and sea terminals and border crossings, which are obviously very important for your trade finance operations, because they're the ones that are going to be more likely to be listed on shipping manifests. So how many names are we talking about? Well, I said the gazetteer from America, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, produces 9 million geographic names. If you take that and the American names and all the other sources you can find, we're probably talking about 4 million place names for populated places. So cities, towns, regions, villages, hamlets, which is obviously rather a lot. Critically, 200,000 of them are in Iran. Now, why Iran has quite so many place names, I can't tell you. It may be the distributed nature of the place across the desert. It is a big country with a significant population, but what we're basically saying is 1 in 20 place names in the world are actually in Iran. If you're looking at Syria, North Korea, Sudan, Cuba, you're talking 10-20,000 place names. So there's an order of magnitude different, which gives us a problem in that country. Now, do you have to screen for all of those names? Certainly not. Some of those names are tiny hamlets, and here we have an example that I just pulled out at random on the map of Iran. It's called Akhdar, and I think it's got a population of about 100 people. I've gone through and counted the actual properties. There's not too many, and I think this is pretty typical of how Iran is organized, and hence the large number of places. But you don't have to go down to that level. Nobody is dictating to you how you do CTRP screening and what names you're going to put in there. If you're using a tool like Furcosoft or similar ones, you probably have these kind of names built in there. They do include large databases of places. So we've talked about it. Let's give it a try. For those of you that went on webinar number 2, fuzzy matching, we had a little sandpit area where we could actually try out some fuzzy matching rules, see what they did, what they came back with. So I've got a similar sandpit here for CTRP. So we've loaded in all the town names for our big 5 countries. So if you put in Khartoum, we find that it's a place name in Sudan. That's no great surprise, or it shouldn't be to people. If I put in Khartoum featuring in an address, we can see it also says Sudan, because when we do CTRP screening, it's a contains matching operation. So we're looking for this address containing certain words like Khartoum. Okay, so Khartoum is a rather big place in Sudan. I just showed you a place called Akhdar in Iran on the map, and there we can see it's in Iran. Okay, all good so far. Well, let's try it with Cuba. The obvious place to try with Cuba is Havana. Okay, Cuba, it works. And if someone can provide me with a place name in North Korea. Okay, how about Yonggwang? Again, we identify North Korea. And presumably, if I put in a place name not in those big 5 countries, like Huddersfield, which for those not in the UK, is a northern town in the Pennines of England, it doesn't identify it. So all good so far. We can put in place names from these countries and they identify them. We can put in place names from other places and they don't identify them. Let's test another one. Let's put in Preston, and obviously Preston is in England and also in Cuba. And here we come across a little problem that some place names exist in many countries. Now, are there many of these? Well, quite a few. We can see that Preston is in Cuba, and let's try another one almost at random. You might think I've rehearsed this and tried to find deliberately difficult ones. If I put in Long Island, I can see that's a place in Sudan. And if I put in Armagh, which is a county in Northern Ireland, I can see that's also in Iran. So I can see there's definitely going to be a problem with sort of false positives generated from doing CTRP screening in these particular countries, in that there's some kind of overlap. So how can I address that? That's obviously going to be an issue for me. We can score a CTRP match against an address to determine the likelihood of where it is. And we can do this against various attributes of the name, so that where we have multiple hits on a particular address, we can do a risk analysis and determine what we think is the most likely country from that. So if we just have Akhtar, that's not going to be a strong match particularly, because it's just a little place in Iran. If I have Akhtar Yazd, Yazd is a region in Iran, and if I had Akhtar, Yazd, then that's a very strong indication indeed that the location is Iran, much stronger than just having Akhtar on its own. So what kind of factors could affect this scoring to give me a relatively good or bad feeling that we've got something going on in one of these countries? Well, if I've got a very common name, and there we looked at Preston, which is a town name in many countries, then that's obviously going to cause an issue. Malé is the most popular place name. It is present in 46 different countries, so places like that are going to be significant for us, and we're going to have to do something about it. The length of the name is going to be significant to us, because if we match on a really long name, and I've given you a really long name, which is the longest in the world, and those of you who've been on holidays in North Wales will recognise this place immediately. Having a really long match like that is going to be much more significant than having a tiny little match on a 1 or 2 character place name. There are quite a few 1 character place names and hundreds, many hundreds of 2 character place names. The prominence of the place is going to be significant to us if we're matching on a capital city of a country, or a capital of a region, or a large administrative region compared to a small district. Then that is going to be of greater significance to us. And if we identify, as we talked about above with Akhtar and Yazd, 2 places in close proximity to each other, 2 names located within the same address, that's going to boost the chances of us actually finding one of those addresses. So let's have another play with this and see what we can do with this scoring. I'll bring up my little sandpit area, and let's put in some examples. Okay, well, I said Preston as an example, and that's in Cuba, and that's just looking at our big 5 countries. So let's turn on the rest of the world. I can see that Preston is in the United Kingdom, Finland, Sweden, and the United States. And I've lost Cuba. Now the reason for that is Preston is a tiny place in Cuba, and it's a more significant place than these other countries. The United Kingdom has scored a slightly higher score than the others because Preston is a more significant place in that country. Down here I have a threshold score where I can set how interested I am in other countries that have scored less. So if I turn that down and increase my risk, I can find other places where Preston is significant. So as I turn that down, I can find Preston is in a lot of places. So if I go down to 70%, I'm finding Preston in all kinds of places. So we talked about if we had 2 places from the same country in close proximity, that would make things very much more significant to us. So if I say Preston, Lancashire, all the others have gone now because I've got double confirmation that it's England, I've got the UK in Preston, I've got the UK in Lancashire. They also both happen to be places in the United States as well, but obviously not quite so significant because I've got a bigger score in the United Kingdom. So by applying all this CTRP information I've got, I can do a risk profile to have a look at that address and get the most likely things back. We also talked about the length of the name. So let's have a look at two places in North Wales. There we have the longest place name in the world, which I won't try pronouncing. I did actually look up the pronunciation of this on the internet shortly before this webinar to have a go at pronouncing it, and decided against it. Sorry. But if you can pronounce it, well done. That scored 30 points on my scoring system here. Your scoring system on your pre-book product like Focus Opt or whatever will probably have similar algorithms to this. And if I compare that to Rhyl, a similar place in North Wales, but obviously very short, that's only scoring 18. So you can see how I've sort of made the length of the name significant in the scoring. We talked about the commonality of the name. We looked at that with Preston. Let's have a look at it again with London. If you're dealing with UK addresses, London is going to be very prevalent. It's one of the most common place names in the world, largely due to English people going out and conquering foreign soils. And it can be in all those countries, even in Jan Mayen Island. And compare that to Ipswich, a similar name place in the UK. Again, a much smaller list. So we're going to give much more prominence to a hit on Ipswich than we are on London, because it narrows down what we're talking about a lot more. Now, if you remember back to webinar 1 on data quality, we had a look at a data profile of some countries, and we in particular looked at 3 entries for North Korea. And when we looked at them, we sort of said, oh, well, they actually look like North Korea, because this one in address line 4 has Seoul, which we know is the capital of South Korea. So we suspect the country is set to North Korea, but the address is from South Korea, and our risk is being overstated. Well, can our CTRP screening sort of help us with that? Well, the answer is yes, it can. And if we take one of those addresses, and this is a real address now we're talking about, we can see that the CTRP screening has recognized it as being South Korea rather than North Korea, probably through the presence of this Haeundae-gu, which is the name of a province of South Korea. There was another one we looked at. Again, this was recorded as being in North Korea, but the address is in South Korea. Jeoji City is a place in South Korea. So we can use our CTRP screening against our country information to identify where we got the country wrong, and we can address the risk statement we're having, the risk profile we think we have, we can correct and adjust it. Okay, so everything's looking great. Let's put in another address. This is an address near where I live, 22 Havana Avenue, Chorlton-cum-Hardy. Now, Chorlton-cum-Hardy is a town in Manchester, and Havana Avenue is a street in Chorlton-cum-Hardy. So that is hardly a match I want to make, and it's saying there's sort of equal scoring between Cuba and the United Kingdom for this. I don't really want that. That's a very obvious false positive. So what can I do about things like that? Well, I can skip matches I don't want. There's nobody who's telling me that if I have an address which has Havana in it, then I need to investigate it. I can do all kinds of elimination or skipping of these matches to suit my risk appetite and to reduce my false positive rate. We talked before on matching that it's very good to reduce your false positive rate because you can focus on better quality matches. You can spend more time on the fewer matches that really count. So what can I do for this kind of thing? Well, I can skip on addresses that are coming up frequently. So if I've got one particular address that's coming up over and over, and I've recognized that this is not an address I want to investigate every time, I can put that into my system as a whitelist to make sure we skip over it and don't deal with it. Or I'm just going to turn on an option here called Remove Street Names. I can recognize that the address is followed by avenue, street, road, boulevard. I think I have a list of about 200 sort of recognized generic street type names and abbreviations, and discount it on that principle that that's part of a street name rather than a town. Okay, back to the pack. Last page about ports. Ports, when you're doing trade finance, are the most significant part of this business. They're what your shipping invoices, trade manifests are going to include. All the sources we talked about earlier are going to recognize port, are going to give you port information, particularly the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which gives us a lovely gazetteer. The other good place to go for this kind of information are shipping companies. If you bring up the web page for Hapag Lloyd, for example, it will list all the places that it will ship to and give you the particular spellings that they use that will then be on shipping invoices. So Hapag Lloyd, for instance, currently ship to 7 destinations. That's 5 destinations, sorry. I can't count, in Iran, and there they are with those particular spellings. At SQA, when we do assurance on CTR screenings, these are the names we take to input to test your CTRP screening is working correctly for ports. So we go to these various websites with our sort of web spider, download this information so we can create sort of dummy trade manifests that include port information that is real and live and used by shipping companies. So that is all I have to say on CTRP screening. I know it's a bit of a specialist thing, this. It doesn't apply to everybody, but I hope you found something useful. What have we got out of it in summary? Well, this is useful. Do it to cover a risk you've identified. And I'm sure that some of you will consider this a risk in your business. Much like PEPs, which is another topic we could cover on a basis like this, there is no official list or definitive guide to what you need to screen. So nobody is telling you what level of cities and towns you need to use, what countries you're going to have to screen against, what level of matching, whether you want to include fuzzy matching or not. No one's saying that. You have to identify your risk and implement accordingly. And if you're clever with the technology, you can get the false positives down nicely. So you're only investigating the things you should be investigating. The next webinar is going to be a really good one that's going to interest everybody. Not only saying this one wasn't a good one, and it's all about systems assurance on AML systems. So we're going to look at how we can introduce an assurance program to look at your sanctions and PEP screening investigations. It will be next Wednesday at the regular time. There will be a later one at 8 p.m. Please inform your network about these webinars. We're delighted to give them. We're quite happy to continue to deliver them for free, and we'd like as many people as possible to see them. If you want them on a face-to-face basis, if you want to come round for us to come round to your place for some training, we're more than welcome to do that. And if you want to find out further about SQA consulting or CTRP screening, then this is how you can get in touch with us. Now we've managed to squeeze that just into 30 minutes. Thank you all for listening. There wasn't any questions that came up during the presentation, but I'll take all questions now. And the first question is from Adrian, who says, does the Trade Finance Department scan the bills of lading into their systems, or do staff manually input names? There are systems that do scan these bills of lading. but they're very unreliable. And what I tend to see is people do manually read them and put them in. What you often find is that companies have logos which are presented in odd ways, and they're not really the optical character recognition, which works great where you've got nice Helvetica text, doesn't work on company logos where the name might be in a circle. And so what you generally find is you have large teams of people reading these and looking for addresses, sort of locations and company names, and typing them in, loading into the system, which are then screened. So any more questions? Always happy to answer your questions. Thank you, Marjorie. Points out it's really interesting, even though it probably not affect us. There are a lot of situations, a lot of businesses where CTRP screening will not really come into it. But I think as compliance professionals, it's always good to know about what's going on in the industry and what options are available. Any other questions? Thank you, David. David says it was an excellent session. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Adrian. It's a good question. And I'll see you next week as well. If anybody wants to put a particular name in the sandpit, I will do that for you. So I'll just hang around and see if there's any questions. Thank you, Sean. I shall be seeing you shortly. Okay, I'm starting to see people leave. I'm not getting any more questions. Any more questions at all? Okay, you are leaving in your droves now, so unless anybody has a particular question coming up, I'm going to close the webinar down. But thank you all for attending. So unless a question is forthcoming in the next few seconds, I'm going to close down. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.
The organizer